All right, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to start this meeting. I'm Andy. I'm the Ventura River Watershed Council manager. Thanks to everyone for taking the time and joining today. I appreciate it. Looks like we have about 25 people, so we're able to at least get started. Some more will probably file in shortly. That being said, I'm just calling this to order. You see the agenda on the screen about what we have planned today. It's going to be kind of a wildfire-centric meeting discussion, followed up by an update from the executive leadership of Ventura River in-stream flow. So we got a pretty packed agenda today. I appreciate the patience with everyone. I know we're going on about 3 hours. So I know everyone's probably a little tired of Zoom, but I think this is worth the time here. So moving forward, I just need to get someone I need to adopt the meeting minutes. Can I get a motion to adopt last meeting minutes? Oh. Someone needs to unmute and motion.
So moved.
I'm sorry, Mike, but you broke out for that first good portion of what you said. All we heard was you were so moved.
So moved. We adopt, to make a motion to adopt the minutes. So moved.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Can I have a second? Don't all speak up at once here.
Second, Louise Lampera, Ventura County CoLab.
Thank you, Louise. Appreciate it, guys. All righty, moving right on forward here. We're now going to do the general updates, the roundtable here. So this is a moment for when I call on you in the list, please feel free to provide a very brief and short update to the council about any projects your organization is working on, any interests, or just introducing yourself to the rest of the people online today. All right, well, we'll move right on through it. It looks like we have Alexander Prescott.
Hey everybody, Alexander Prescott here from the Los Angeles Regional Water Board. I manage a couple 319 grants in Ventura County. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks for joining, Alexander. Moving forward, we got, I'm sorry if I pronounce this wrong, Mooneen Powers. Looks like she unmuted herself. All right, we're looped back around. Moving forward, I got Bergen.
Hi, I'm Mary Bergen, and I'm a local landowner on San Antonio Creek, and just glad to be here.
Hey, thanks for joining. We're happy that you made the time. We're always welcoming community members to join. Moving forward, we got Bert Rapp.
Okay, you have to click on the right unmute button. Everything's going well here at the Ventura River Water District. Our groundwater levels are higher than average. We're, of course, in the driest autumn, one of the fourth driest autumn we've had in our district records so far this year. So hopefully it does start raining after the first of the year. Looks like we're in for a dusty, brown, dry Christmas, but maybe January, February, things will change and we'll start getting some rain. But so far we're holding our own.
I think we all have our fingers crossed here. Moving on to Bruce.
Bruce Kubler, Ventura River Water District Board of Directors. Good update, Bert. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Brian Bondi.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you, Andy. I'm Brian Bondi, Executive Director, Upper Ventura River Groundwater Agency. Thanks for the opportunity to give a brief update. I just want to remind everybody that the agency is continuing to work on its developing its groundwater sustainability plan. The first 6 months of the upcoming year are going to be pretty busy. All the main policy elements of the plan are going to be coming together, and we'll be looking to issue a draft later in the year. So we encourage everybody who's interested in the management of groundwater along the Ventura River to stay tuned and engage in our process. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for the update. Appreciate that, Brian. We got Bryant Baker.
Hi, I'm Bryant Baker. I'm the Conservation Director at Los Padres Forest Watch. I'm going to be presenting today about wildfire ecology in the watershed and the region.
Thank you for taking the time. Looking forward to it. Next, we got Christopher Dons.
Good morning. I'm Chris Danch. I am the Executive Director of the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council, and I will be one of the presenters today.
Thanks, Christopher. Sorry for butchering your last name there. Appreciate
That's okay.
it.
Somehow I'll find it in my heart to forgive you. I don't know. It'll take
I was going to say, try to pronounce my last name. Maybe you'll forgive me.
I don't even try, so.
All right. Moving on forward. We got Danielle Iaconelli.
Yes, Iaconelli. Good morning, everyone. Danielle Iaconelli with Stillwater Sciences. I'm a fisheries biologist there, and I'm interested to hear about some of this wildfire update.
Great. Happy we got your interest. Moving forward, we got Desiree.
Wait.
There you go. You're unmuted.
Good morning. I'm with the VCRCD, and I'm excited to hear what everyone's going to present today.
All right. Thanks, Desiree, for joining. She's a new team member here, everyone. So she's getting to meet everyone. All right. Moving forward, we got Emily Duncan.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm with the LA Water Board, like Alexander Prescott. We work together, and I'm the swamp coordinator for our office, and I was interested to listen in about the fire monitoring.
Great. Happy to have you both here. Thanks for taking the time. We got Jamie next.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, nice, my shiny face. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jamie Whiteford, District Scientist with the Ventura County Resource Conservation District, and I'll be presenting on the Ventura River in-stream flow project later on. Thanks, Andy.
All righty. Thanks, Jamie. Moving forward here, we got Jody Switzer.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Jody Switzer, Water Programs Director with the Farm Bureau of Ventura County. And I don't have any updates to share, just joining the meeting as a stakeholder today.
Great. How about Kevin Delano?
Hi, folks. My name is Kevin Delano. I'm a geologist at the State Water Resources Control Board, Division of Water Rights. I'm in the unit that's working on developing a surface water groundwater model of the Ventura River Watershed, along with the regional board, Alexander Prescott and Emily Duncan. And I'm also in the unit that's developing working on in-stream flow policy for the Ventura River Watershed. And thank you for having me today.
Thanks for taking the time. Moving forward, we got Laura Schellenberger.
Hi, it's Laura Schellenberger, also known as Laura Meeker. I'm the coordinator for the Santa Clara River Watershed. You just might have noticed my email address has officially changed to Schellenberger, FYI, for those of you who know me and work with me. I'm just tuning in to listen to some of the updates in the Ventura River Watershed. I apologize, I will have to step out for a while around 10 o'clock, but maybe we'll be able to join again after another meeting. So thank you for putting this on. I'm interested in some of the updates on the fire monitoring for Ventura River Watershed, and the Santa Clara River Watershed will be having a meeting next in, it looks like January. We've decided to postpone our December meeting.
All right. Thanks, Laura. And sorry about that. And I'll recognize.
Totally fine.
Moving forward, we got Louise Lampara.
Good morning, Louise Lampera, Ventura County CoLab. I don't have any updates. I'm just thrilled to be able to finally not have a conflict with something at the Planning Commission and be able to join you guys and not just read the minutes after.
We're happy to have you. Thanks for taking the time. Hopefully you get some interest out of this. Moving forward, we got Mauler Arthur with California Fire Safe Council.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. I haven't participated in this before. I'm new at the California Fire Safe Council. I'm the Southern California Regional Outreach Coordinator, and I'm located near Pasadena, California. And I'm very interested to hear about what's going on. Thank you.
Excited to have you. Thanks for taking the time. How about Megan Duran with the county?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. I'm calling in, so a little different. Hi, I'm Megan Doran with Ventura County Public Works Agency Watershed Protection. Update-wise, you may have noticed the Santa Ana Boulevard Bridge project is getting kicked off. That goes over the Ventura River in Oakview. We started with vegetation removal a couple weeks ago out there and looking to kick off the construction portion of that project probably in spring next year, April, May timeframe it's looking like. That's all I have for now though.
All right, thank you, Megan. I have an M. Gibson. I also have the Megan Gibson. Oh, it looks like they can't unmute, maybe. All right, we'll move on to Mike.
Hi, this is Mike Sullivan, representing the Ojai Pixie Growers Association. And in terms of updates, I think we're looking at a positive 2021 crop. But as growers and landowners, we're navigating a number of uncertainties in the watershed that are stressful. But I'm eager today to hear about fire safety and maybe get a better understanding, or some of the experts to enlighten us in how agriculture plays a role in that in terms of land use and fire suppression in the valley and watershed. Thanks.
Great. Good to hear. Thanks, Mike. Naomi Schwartz.
This is actually her father. This is Yanni Schwartz.
Oh, sorry, Yanni.
It's okay. I'm sorry. I jumped onto my daughter's computer here. In any case, I am the Minerals and Geology Program Manager for the Los Padres National Forest and the Bear Program Coordinator. And I will present to you, give you a little introduction to the Bear Program.
Great, thank you. We're looking forward to that. Next, we got Regina Hirsch, Watershed Progressive.
Hi, everybody. Regina Hirsch, Watershed Progressive. I think my main update is we're about to kick off the Integrated Water Strategies and Toolkit Quantification model, and that's funded by Wildlife Conservation Board, and it's a Creek Lands Conservancy project. And so that will help us identify different opportunities for stream flow enhancement in the full Ventura watershed and actually put quantifications to them. So we'll be sending out everybody when we have a kickoff, a notification. So that should be happening, I think, in January or February, as the data is just getting compiled. So looking forward to that, how we can intersect with fire resilience. So thanks for holding these sessions.
Glad to hear so many people are finding it interesting. Russell. Hello.
Morning, everyone. Russell Morrow with Cal Trout and just a local stakeholder listening today. Thanks.
All right, thanks for joining. Hey, Tom Hicks.
Morning. I am going to give a little bit more of an update on the work that Legal is doing as part of the VRIF project later this morning. But at a minimum, notwithstanding COVID, I'm down to Ojai several times in the last couple months just to just keep listening and keep the dialogue going with our project partners. And most succinctly, working with state agencies, Department of Fish and Wildlife, talking with the State Water Resources Control Board to better understand how landowners can conserve water to enhance stream flow. And we'll hear more about that later.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate the time. Last one here, Tyrone.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hi, everybody. Tyrone LaFay. I am the Public Affairs and Water Conservation Manager with Casitas Municipal Water District. Happy to be here.
All right. Thanks for taking the time. Looks like I got through the list here for those as it was going. I'm going to give a real brief update and we'll move right over into Brian's.
Andy?
Yes. Oh, Lynn, I'm so sorry. Lynn.
That's okay. No problem. Lynn Rodriguez, good morning, everybody. I'm with the Watersheds Coalition of Ventura County Integrated Regional Water Management Program. And I just have a couple of quick things. We are moving forward with our first round of Prop 1 implementation grant funds for the 5 projects that were funded. And Cayugas Municipal Water District is going to be the grant administrator for that. And we're excited to be taking the next step towards getting our grant agreement executed. We've had a recent update from DWR that they're looking to release the round 2 proposal solicitation package sometime in the fall of 2021. And as you probably remember, this is a funding area wide effort now as far as when we apply. And so our funding area, which is still very actively engaged in our disadvantaged community involvement program, wants to delay our application until we're finished with that disadvantaged community grant, which won't be now until the end of 2022. So we're looking at coming out probably sometime, an application due at the end of 2022 for our funding area. We haven't finalized the details on that yet, but stay tuned. And well before that, we will be conducting a request for projects, a call for projects for the IRWM plan, and this watershed will be engaged in conversation about what we want to put forward for that and updating our plan to include those new projects. And I believe we're going to start that, sometime in the late winter, early spring of next year. We have a new GIS platform and a new online form for folks to submit. So we'll be doing some training on that. We're still fine tuning it, but so look for that early next year. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Lan. My apologies.
No worries.
And real quick, I don't give an update, but I do have a quick update I'd like to do from the RCD perspective. It's a quick call for projects on our end. I have 2. I sent out a listserv the other day through our own stuff, but we have wildfire recovery funding still available for people affected by 2018, 19, and 2020 wildfires through December 31st of this year. Funding is going to be going through next year. So please reach out if you are impacted. That's private and public landowners. And it includes the Thomas Fire. Additionally, my last one here is we are looking to expand our Monarch program into the Ventura watershed. So if you have any overwintering habitat locations that you'd like to propose, please reach out to me. All right. Thank you, everyone. With that, we will move forward. So we got Bryant Baker. He's going to be discussing wildfire ecologies on behalf of the Los Padres Forest Watch. So thank you. And I will let Bryant kind of take over the screen and feel free to start sharing.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. Okay, everybody should be able to see my presentation.
Perfect.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm Bryant Baker. I'm the Conservation Director over at Los Padres Forest Watch. We're based in Santa Barbara, but we work a lot in Ventura County because of the Los Padres National Forest is there. We work to protect public lands up and down the Central Coast. I spend a lot of time in the Ventura River Watershed, actually. I have done a lot of photo documentation of regrowth after the Thomas Fire in the watershed specifically. I spend a lot of time just in general working on wildfire related issues and documenting post-fire habitats, throughout not just the Los Padres National Forest, but all along the Central Coast and in the Sierra Nevada as well. So I'm going to talk just about fire ecology in our region. It's going to be very specific to the Ventura River watershed, but it actually applies. It applies to pretty much anywhere coastal, central coast, south coast, anywhere where you have mountains with chaparral dominated areas. So for you folks that are from the LA area, I heard a couple of people from the LA Water Board, I think, are here. You know, this applies to the San Gabriels as well. So, you know, this is not something that it doesn't only apply to the Ventura River watershed, but I do find that the watershed is a pretty good microcosm of the region. And so, you know, first thing, just look at the ecosystem composition of the watershed. You can see that it's mostly chaparral and coastal sage scrub. So it's mostly native shrublands. There are some oak woodlands. There's quite a bit of agriculture and you know, pasture land, grasslands, and urban areas. I won't be talking much about those today. I'm going to focus a little bit more on the shrubland aspect, but I'll also talk about oak woodlands to some extent, hardwood forest. We don't have a lot of hardwood forest in the watershed. It's mostly along riparian corridors, so along streams. And then there's a little bit of conifer forest as you get deeper into the mountains. It's not maybe the conifer forest you normally think of when you hear that. It's almost exclusively big cone Douglas fir in the watershed. So I'll talk really specifically about that species and how it deals with fire. So to give you just a visual idea of these ecosystems, again, this is chaparral. This is our most widespread ecosystem in California. You can find it in basically every county. It's extremely dominant in the mountains of Southern California and along the Central Coast. It's a low ecosystem. It's a short ecosystem made up of shrubs that are usually pretty densely packed together, have overlapping canopies. They are very drought hardy shrubs. They tend to be evergreen. They have very thick leathery leaves usually. That's called sclerophyllous leaves or plants. So they're quite adapted to our very dry conditions that we have in our region. And they also have some really unique relationships with fire and are quite resilient to a very particular fire regime. Coastal sage scrub, kind of like chaparral's little sibling. It's usually a little bit shorter of an ecosystem. It's got a lot more subshrubs, which are kind of a smaller version of shrubs. They aren't always evergreen. A lot of these species that you find in coastal sage scrub are actually drought deciduous. They'll drop their leaves late summer or in the fall. Sometimes we call it soft chaparral. You can walk through it a little bit more easily. It's not as impenetrable as mature chaparral generally is. And you tend to find it in drier areas. So a lot of times you'll see it on south-facing slopes and just generally in areas that don't get as much moisture. On the other sort of side of that, though, is oak woodland. This is something that you'll see scattered throughout the region, and you'll often find it on more shady, north slope areas where you have a little bit more moisture. So this is a taller ecosystem than chaparral or coastal sage scrub. In our area, it's mostly made up of coast live oak. That's the dominant oak species that we have here. And it usually is accompanied by California Bay laurel, sometimes madrone, depending on what elevation you're at. And it's got pretty well-developed understories of poison oak, ferns, all sorts of cool plants. So this is a pretty neat ecosystem. And then our hardwood forest, this is not necessarily true for most of the state. If you go higher in elevation, go up in the mountains, like in the Sierra Nevada, you'll find different types of hardwood forests, especially if you go up north, like into the Klamath Mountains. They won't always be so restricted to these riparian areas, but in Southern California, in our region, where you tend to find this type of ecosystem is really along streams, and it's comprised mostly of things like sycamore, cottonwood, alders, willows, all hardwoods. Most of them are deciduous to some extent. And, you see this kind of color in the fall from the cottonwoods. It's really, really lovely. And these are really interesting from a wildfire perspective, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then, of course, the conifers. These are big cone Douglas firs. You really only find these in Southern California. They're a sibling of the Douglas fir that you might be more familiar with that occurs up north or in the Rocky Mountains. This is a really cool species, kind of a relict of a really expansive forest that once covered much of Southern California when the climate was cooler. And it's now, over the last several thousand years, been restricted to mostly canyons and north-facing slopes where there's a little bit more moisture retention. So the question I always get about wildfire is what's normal, what's natural, what's not. You're going to notice that a lot of this is pretty focused on Chaparral, and that's just because that is the dominant ecosystem that we have in the region. Most of what burned in the Thomas Fire, especially in the Los Padres National Forest, was Chaparral. So it's going to be pretty heavily focused on that. And in Chaparral, what we know from a variety of different scientific evidence is that naturally in Southern California, Central Coast, what Chaparral would normally experience is large, intense fire every 30 to 150 or more years. And when you have fire that's occurring at shorter intervals than that, especially when you get down into the 15 years or less, you can have what's called type conversion. So you can actually start to lose native shrub species, and they can start to be replaced by non-native grasses and weeds. And so that's one issue that we face. I'm not going to go so much into issues, problems that we're dealing with fire in our area, but we are dealing with a fire frequency issue in much of Southern California where we have generally too much fire. And that is leading to loss of chaparral in a lot of places. It's normal for these fires to be intense and to burn everything, to burn all the above ground biomass. That does not mean it kills everything. I'll talk more about that in a bit. And intensity, though, is a little bit more variable in the woodlands and the forest. There can be a pretty big range of fire effects in forest and woodlands. And again, we know a lot of this from decades of science. A lot of papers have been published, a lot of studies that have looked at how chaparral has evolved, how it deals with fire, and what happens when you have too much fire. So there's a lot of science behind what I'm going to be talking about, and I'll provide a little annotated bibliography link that you can go check out if you want to read more about the science at the end. So, I think we hear a lot that we have a year-round fire season. That is, yes, technically a fire can start any time of year, but when you actually look at fire, data for our region. So I'm showing you just for our region, Ventura County, LA County, Santa Barbara County. When I look back at the last 70 years of fire data, what I see is that we have actually a pretty distinct fire season that starts in about May and goes to November or December. And we have a peak of average fires per month over the last 70 years in July, which is interesting because we actually don't have as much acreage burning in the summer months. So what you're seeing here is that even though we have more fires on average in the summer months, more acreage on average burns in the fall. And that is really easily explained by the fact that we have not only Santa Ana winds, but we just tend to have extremely dry conditions by September, October. You still have a little bit more vegetation moisture especially in May and June, and even in July compared to what you have in October or November. So we're actually in December right now, kind of similar to 2017, where we really hadn't had any rain coming up, to when the Thomas Fire started. Hopefully that's not going to happen again, and we'll get some rain soon. But it's not necessarily unusual to be in this situation where we're extremely dry. The vegetation moisture is really low. And if you have Santa Ana winds and an ignition, which ignitions are usually from humans in our area, then you can have a very large fire that occurs. And again, when a fire burns in our area, especially in Chaparral, it leaves behind this sort of charred landscape where it doesn't look like anything's going to grow back. People often call it a moonscape, or they say it's been nuked. This is exactly what it's supposed to look like. I know that maybe seems odd to some folks, but this is the sign that the fire burned correctly in Chaparral. If it doesn't burn hot enough, you're not going to get seed germination by a lot of species. And a lot of these plants that you see are actually not dead at all. And in fact, you can even see in this photo, this is just a couple months after the fire along the Highway 33. And you can see most of these shrubs are actually already starting to resprout. So, you know, speaking about resprouting, and I really think it's important to understand, if you want to understand fire ecology in our region, you have to understand how plants cope with fire. And so I put plants into 5 different categories when I think about how do they deal with fire. Obligate seeders, obligate resprouters, facultative seeders, fire followers, and offsite seeders. These are, you know, sometimes they can be difficult to understand exactly what a plant is doing after a fire. And there's still a lot we don't know about how some plants cope with fire. But for the most part, we have a pretty good sense of what different species in our area, what the most common species, you know, what group they fall into. And so when I talk about this, I'm really just talking about how does a plant deal with being burned and how does it repopulate an area afterward. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about these 5 fire response strategies. So the first one is I'm going to talk about is obligate seeders. Now, these have adult plants that are in the ecosystem when the fire comes through. And those adult plants are actually killed outright by the fire. They cannot resprout. The only way that they repopulate an area is by coming up from a dormant seed bank. So for the many decades that they've been growing since the last fire, they've been reproducing, putting out seed into the soil, and those seeds don't germinate until the next fire comes through. And usually the seeds need high heat or some other fire cue like smoke, chemicals from charred wood, often in combination with some sort of temperature stratification in the soil following the fire. And when you get those right conditions, then the seeds will germinate, and they'll often germinate in full force. So this is what you expect to see with obligate seeders. Again, the adult plants are killed. You'll sometimes see their skeletons remain, but they will not be resprouting from the base. And instead, you'll only see seedlings coming up. These are the species that you tend to lose when you have overly frequent fire. And that's because they need a long time after a fire to be able to grow up to maturity, start reproducing again, and put out enough seed to build up that soil seed bank so that by the time the next fire comes through, they can germinate and repopulate. And if a fire comes through earlier than that, you know, any immature plants that are there will be killed usually. And there are a lot of well-known species in this category. Several of our Ceanothus species, which is my personal favorite genus. I really love this group of shrubs. They're really fascinating. But we have several in the area that are obligate cedars. Some manzanitas are obligate cedars as well. Deerweed is a really common plant that you see, a really common shrub after fire. It's in the legume family, and I'll talk a little bit more about why it's so important, but it's also an obligate cedar. And you really, you see it come out pretty heavily in post-fire landscapes in our area. And again, this is what it looks like for obligate cedars after a fire. So this is just 6 months after the cave fire, which burned back in November of last year near Santa Barbara. I've been doing a lot of post-fire documentation of how things are regrowing in this area in the Santa Ynez Mountains. And this is big pod Ceanothus that you see here. So this is the dead stump. This was a pretty large, mature individual before the fire came through. I think the last time that this area had burned may have been back in the 80s, but in this particular spot, it could have been back in the 60s, actually, during the Coyote Fire was the last time it might have burned. And so this was, again, a really large, mature plant. It was killed outright by the fire, which is normal. And what you see are all of its seedlings coming up nearby. And sometimes you'll see just thousands and thousands of seedlings carpeting the ground in these areas. This is a pretty good number here, but there are areas really close by to this spot that just it's seedlings as far as you can see, kind of blanketing everything. It's pretty cool. Here's what manzanita, very similarly, this is the fire-killed bigberry manzanita from before the fire. So this is what, this is the old stem, basically. And it's dead, but it's got a seedling coming up right next to it. There's some other plants here. This is bush poppy coming up from seed as well. So this is a really common scene in post-fire areas, especially in Chaparral in our area. Deerweed it produces some pretty spectacular scenery in the post-fire landscape, especially in that second and third spring after the fire. It really gets going. And this is in the Thomas Fire, about 18 months after the fire along Highway 33. This is the south slope of Dry Lakes Ridge. So this is in the Ventura River Watershed. And everywhere you looked during this particular spring, this was back last year, this was 2019, it was nothing but yellow. It was really beautiful. And this is a very important plant post-fire. And I'll talk a little bit more here in a bit about why this plant and others like it are so important. So on the other end of the spectrum are obligate resprouters. These are plants that they have adults in the ecosystem when the fire comes through, but they also will generally have immature plants and seedlings coming up. Those seedlings, those immature plants, and their seeds are usually killed outright by the fire, but the adults tend to survive and they're able to resprout. And so they will not come up from seed after the fire. They don't have fire-cued seed germination like the Obligate Seeders. So this is, we often call it top killing. You know, the fire will come through, it'll top kill the plant, but the plant's not actually dead. Its root system is still alive and well, and then it will resprout. And, you know, if it is able to go long enough without another fire, it'll, you know, get back to that same size that it was before the last fire. And these also need just a little bit of time, you know, to pull carbon back in, restore their, you know, their carbohydrate storage, and be able to grow up to maturity and start reproducing again, or start putting out seed again. So these are really cool plants. There's a lot of them that fall into this category that you may know of: mountain mahogany, hollyleaf cherry, toyon, coffeeberry, blue elderberry. The list goes on. I can go on and on about this group. It's a really fascinating group of plants, and pretty diverse. Here is what you would expect. Hollyleaf cherry is a really good example of an obligate resprouter. And this is an area in Santa Barbara County that hasn't burned in 27 years. So this is well after the post-fire period. But you can see that the seeds are germinating. They don't need fire to germinate. They're doing that on their own. This is actually bear scat that you're seeing. So the black bear had really enjoyed a lovely meal of hollyleaf cherries, which are pretty tasty, actually. They don't have a lot of flesh on them, but they are tasty at the right time of year. And this is all the seedlings coming up. And if you see hollyleaf cherry right after a fire, you will not see seedlings, but you will see very prolific resprouting. I can't remember the last time I found a hollyleaf cherry that was actually killed by a fire. It just doesn't happen very often. They're very hardy. They're very resilient, and they're able to resprout pretty well after a fire. And what you'll see on these plants that fall into this category, as well as the next category I'm going to talk about, facultative cedars, you'll see that they have burls. These are big masses at the base of the plant, usually partially buried. This is where there's a lot of adventitious growing buds that are kind of within the plant. They are protected from the fire, either by being buried or the fact that they're kind of in this big hardened mass at the bottom of the plant. So this is where you often see them resprouting from. Sometimes you'll see the resprouts coming straight out of the burl. You see that with chamise a lot, which is a plant I'm going to talk about in a minute. But this is toyon. Toyon is a wonderful resprouter. It resprouts really, really well. I find that it attains some of the greatest biomass in the first few months after a fire in terms of obligate resprouters. And oaks are another good example of obligate resprouters, but the tree oaks, so coast live oak is a good example of this. They can resprout from their branches. So this is called epicormic sprouting. So you can see a tree that looks completely torched, has no foliage left after the fire. It's all blackened. You give it a couple of months, and you'll start to see little sprouts coming up out of the branches, and within a couple of years, it'll have its full canopy coming back. So it's pretty fascinating to watch. So these are another really resistant tree. They're able to withstand fire pretty well, and resprout from their branches. Okay, so now there's this sort of in-between state between obligate seeders and obligate resprouters. So these are plants that can do both. They can resprout after a fire. They're adult plants that are there. They will not be killed usually. They'll be top killed. So you'll see that above ground biomass is burned, but they will usually resprout from the base, and they have seeds that have been building up in a dormant seed bank, mostly dormant seed bank, and they usually require or are enhanced by fire cues like smoke or high heat that will really stimulate their germination. So you'll see after a fire, these plants will resprout and they'll have seedlings coming up after the fire. A lot of species fall into this category. It's an extremely successful growth strategy for dealing with fire. Chamise is probably the best example that I can think of for this growth strategy. It's also the most common shrub species west of the Sierra Nevada. We have it everywhere you look in the Chaparral. You'll generally find chamise somewhere. Really wonderful plant, and is very good at coming back after fire. Several Ceanothus and Manzanita species are also facultative cedars. Laurel sumac, another really good species, a really good example of this. Most of our sages are facultative cedars, bush poppy, a lot of other species that I'm not going to be able to mention today, but there are several that fall into this category. And again, this is what it looks like on the ground. So this is the Thomas Fire area on Nordhoff Ridge, so just above Ojai. This is about 16 months after the fire. And what you're seeing is this is the old chamise here that was top killed by the fire, but it is resprouting really well. A lot of good growth over just a little over a year. And then you can see all of its seedlings coming up around it as well. So this is a really good example of what a facultative cedar is capable of. Now, fire followers, these are the ones that people get really excited about after a fire. I get excited about them. They're going to sound a little bit like obligate cedars because they also generally have a dormant seed bank and have seeds that are stimulated by the fire, and then they come up from seed after the fire comes through. The difference between obligate cedars and fire followers is that you won't see fire followers in a mature stand of chaparral. So they're adult. You won't see adult plants that get burned. If you do have fire followers and they're getting burned, usually that means that you're having a fire way too soon after the last fire. So that would actually be indicative of a problem. But if things are going right, what you'll see is that you'll have an area that's mature chaparral. You would never know that after it burns, there's going to be an explosion of a bunch of different species of fire followers that come up. And so you'll really only see these in recently burned areas, and they don't last for very long in the landscape. They're kind of ephemeral. You may see them for a few years, up 5 years. It just kind of depends on how the shrubs and other plants are regrowing, because once they start to get tall enough, they'll shade out these fire followers and these will start to disappear. But in the meantime, they've been putting out a bunch of seed back into the soil, and that's building up that seed bank so that the next time it burns, it'll get stimulated. And so that's the life cycle for these plants. They're really fascinating. A lot of different species of fire followers in our area. The fire poppy, the elusive fire poppy, really fun one to see. Actually, several species in the poppy family fall into this category. There are 2 species of eardrops that are really cool. We have in the Thomas Fire area, mostly one called golden eardrops. Looks just like this, but it's a very yellow golden color. A lot of Phacelia species are fire followers. Whispering bells, the list goes on. There's so many of them, and they're all really wonderful. One of my favorites is one that is hated by a lot of people, and that's because it can give you a rash that's can be as bad or worse as poison oak. I have personally never gotten this rash. I may be one of the lucky people that is sort of immune to it, because I have walked in these post-fire areas a lot. I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours around Poodle Dog Bush. It is a really cool fire follower. You just don't see it outside of recently burned areas. It's related to Yerba Santa, but it's a true fire follower. And one of the reasons this and other plants like it are so important is that they come up pretty quickly after a fire. And so you have generally, after things have burned, you have a lot of bare soil, and that is obviously a concern from a watershed standpoint because of erosion, sediment transport, sedimentation. And so what the great thing about these fire followers is that they establish really early ground cover. They're coming up from seed. They may not have really deep roots, but they are just putting out ground cover. They can intercept water so that you're not getting that erosive force from raindrops falling, and they can help slow down runoff as well. And the other big thing that makes them really, really important from an ecological perspective is that they are providing all of this food for pollinators. So they're attracting insects back into the area, butterflies, bees, beetles, and those in turn are attracting birds, which often in turn attract other birds. They attract bobcats and other animals. So it's really important that these fire followers get established early on, because that helps revitalize that food web in these post-fire areas pretty quickly. And it's one of the reasons why you will see some really unique bird species like lazuli buntings, other species that you don't often see outside of burned areas. They tend to like these places because they're going after those insects that are following the flowers. And so again, this is a normal site after a fire. This is 1 week after the cave fire. This is what most people probably see like in the media after things have burned, and it looks pretty bleak, and people are a little freaked out or upset. And I totally understand it looks a little jarring and shocking, but you don't have to wait very long usually, especially if you get a good some good rain in that first spring. You can have a really lovely scenery that occurs pretty soon after. And what you're seeing here are a bunch of toyon mostly, mostly toyon here. They're resprouting. It's hard to tell, but they're resprouting in the background. And this is all giant flowered Phacelia, which is a true fire follower that's coming up. And so this is just 5 months after the fire, and it's really an amazing sight to behold. So the last group that I'm going to talk about are off-site cedars. These are plants that have adult plants usually in the system, and when a fire comes through, any adults, immature plants, and seeds that burn are usually killed. They don't resprout, and they don't have seeds that are sitting there dormant that are cued by fire. They generally are only going to repopulate an area when seed comes in from unburned areas off-site, or if there are survivors. So a lot of tree species fall into this category, and a lot of times they'll just survive the fire, and then they'll put out seed in the following years. And so they can often repopulate from that as well. So sometimes I think of these as like they're off-site cedars, or they're seeding from surviving plants as well. A really good shrub example of this, which we don't have much of in the watershed to my knowledge, but it occurs just north of the Ventura River watershed, especially if you get onto the north side of Pine Mountain in the Coyama River Valley. Or Dry Canyon, those kind of places. You'll see a lot of Great Basin sagebrush, which is an unusual plant to find in our region. It's a lot more common out in Utah and Nevada, but we do have a weird little pocket of it in the Los Padres National Forest that's pretty cool. But it's one that generally, when it burns, it gets killed, and it comes back from the seed being brought in from offsite. Seed for these types of plants, off-site cedars, it's usually brought in by small mammals, birds, wind, a lot of different ways that the seed can come in. And so usually you'll see that these take a little longer to reestablish for that exact reason. So I mentioned deerweed and that it was so vital, and I was going to talk more about it. So one of the reasons it's so vital is that it is what we call a nitrogen fixer. It has, like many other plants in its family, the legume family, they have this really unique symbiosis with a couple of different species of bacteria that basically they have these root nodes that host these bacteria, and the bacteria can take atmospheric nitrogen, which is totally unusable to plants. I mean, it's this inert form of nitrogen that the bacteria can take, and then they can convert it into ammonia or ammonium, something that the plant can then use. And so these plants have this great relationship with these bacteria. They get this nitrogen, and as these plants grow and they die or they drop their leaves, that nitrogen that's now in this bioavailable form gets recycled back into the soil. And this is really important because after a fire, you can lose a lot of nitrogen from the system. Nitrogen can volatilize, unlike a lot of other nutrients. And so usually you have a lack of nitrogen in post-fire landscapes, and that's why you tend to see these types of plants do really, really well, but they're also really important for the growth of other plants later on. And so I love putting some spotlight on these because they're so interesting and they're so important. Deerweed, probably the best example of this, one of the most common plants you find in the post-fire landscape of our area, but all of our lupins are also in this category. You'll see those tend to be really prevalent in post-fire areas. A lot of other species in the legume family, some maybe you haven't heard of. Some of the lotus plants are really cool. So these are really, really fascinating plants. What's really cool is that not just legumes will do this. There are two other types of plants that are capable of this symbiosis in our area, which are really unique. So Ceanothus, most of the Ceanothus species have this capability. They're not as strong of a nitrogen fixer as the legumes, but they are capable of it. And mountain mahogany is another example. And so what's so weird is that these are in the buckthorn family, the Ceanothus plants, and the mountain mahogany is in the rose family. So it's odd because those families generally don't have nitrogen fixers. So that's pretty neat. Now, I'm going to show you just some regrowth shots and kind of explain what you're seeing. This is 2 months after the Thomas fire along Highway 33, and this was the first. I think this was the first photo I took of the area. Andy, am I running out of time? Is that the issue?
You got about 5 minutes left here.
Okay, cool.
I'm Q&A shortly after and moving to the next one.
Okay, yeah, I'm almost done. So this is good. Yeah, so this is laurel sumac about 2 months after the fire. This is that exact same laurel sumac about 29 months. So this is a couple years later. This is what it looked like. So you can see just incredible amount of regrowth. This is in the Ventura River Watershed. This is a tributary to Matilahaw Creek. And you can see 2 months after the fire, looks extremely bleak, like nothing is going to grow back. A lot of oaks here, sycamores, they look dead, pretty torched. And 2 years after the fire, though, you'll see that most of these oaks have survived. They either have sprouted from their branches, the epicormic sprouting, or they've resprouted from their base. A lot of the shrubs have come back. The sycamores have resprouted. You can see willows are establishing along the creek again. So it's a pretty amazing site. Same with the oak woodland areas. This is in Matilahaw Canyon, very oak dominant area, coast live oak. All of these trees were completely black after the fire, really, really torched. But they have, mostly all of them have come back from epicormic sprouting, and they're doing quite well, actually. This is just a couple months ago. And it's really common to see scenes like this. This is 11 months after the fire in Santa Paula Canyon. You know, it already looks pretty good. Like there's a lot of regrowth happening. But this is right before the spring. You know, you wait a few months, you get in the spring, and you'll see an explosion each spring of morning glory and a lot of other native plants that will really green it up, and you can just see how much growth happens just in the springtime. So it's pretty amazing. Now, I just showed you something that looks very green, but that's in the springtime. In the fall, it's very common to see this type of scenery, especially if you drive up Highway 33 right now. You'll see a lot of what looks like just dead or invasive something, you know, it just doesn't look right. It's all red and orange or brown. This is actually a completely normal site. These are native plants. This is morning glory, all draped over everything. There's also usually a lot of deerweed. They're just kind of dormant for this part of the year. This is, again, completely normal. Everything is going just fine here. So don't be alarmed if you see something like this. This is mostly deerweed and morning glory here on the ground. They're just dormant. It's that time of year. It's very dry, and they're not really putting out any green growth. They will sort of come back to life in the springtime. And so just don't freak out if you see these types of scenes, as you go up in the mountains. This is deerweed in the Tillahaw Canyon area. I actually think it's quite lovely in the fall. It has a really, really nice reddish color that it turns to. And then Dry Lakes Ridge, this is a really interesting area at the north end of the watershed. This is what it looked like before the fire, mostly chaparral. This is what it looked like 14 months after the fire. There are these basins up in the ridge that are pretty unique. I was a little worried when I first came up here 14 months after the fire. I didn't think anything was regrowing here, and I was a little nervous about it. All the shrubs are doing really well. Manzanita, that's mostly what you see here, is resprouting. These oaks are doing really well. They were resprouting. And I came back out 4 months later, and it was a completely different world. This is all poodle dog bush, was just everywhere. So it was tough to walk through, but really, really beautiful sight. And the basin was really interesting. It had a lot of diversity. This is what the shrubs look like as they're resprouting. So a lot of really good regrowth just 14 months after the fire. This is the poodle dog bush growing among some charred oaks that are also resprouting. But the basin, this first basin is really interesting. So this was all Great Basin sagebrush, and it turned into a bunch of lupins and other wildflowers. I'm just going to skip through this kind of quickly because I know we're out of time here. But the sagebrush is coming back. It's coming back from seed. Again, it's an off-site cedar. It takes a little while. And then just real quick, bighorn Douglas fir tend to do really well. They're very fire resistant. They have very thick fire resistant bark. They don't often get killed by fire. This is what a stand looks like that was burned by the Thomas fire, and you can see it's doing really well. I'm just going to skip that. And then lastly, riparian hardwood forest. Sometimes you can be in them and you won't even know that it burns. Sometimes the fire doesn't even come into these areas. They're just very moist, shaded, buffering the wind. A lot of reasons why fire doesn't burn these very easily. But when it does, they tend to bounce back really well. This is a bunch of alders that died. But mostly what you see here are a mixture of alders and willows coming up, either from seed or the willows are resprouting. You can see that here as well. These are alder saplings that are coming up from seed. So these riparian areas actually do really well after fire, generally up in the mountains. And that's it. That you can check this link out if you want to read more about the fire science behind a lot of this. lpfw.org/firesci, or you can just get in touch with me if you want to know more. And yeah, if we have time for questions, great. If not, totally understand.
Yeah, no, thanks for that very informative presentation. Great photos, by the way. I need to get out there myself and hike a little bit more after seeing all those beautiful photos you got. Well, that being said, yeah, we'll do a quick Q&A. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up now, or hold your peace and we can discuss later. You got his information on there too. Please feel free to reach out.
This is Andy. This is Regina Hirsch.
Go ahead.
Can I ask a quick question? And thank you so much. This was a really beautiful presentation. You talked a lot about that you're seeing throughout the Ventura watershed and even the Santa Barbara watersheds, really active, good regeneration. Is there any areas that you've seen that are not regenerating what you expected?
Generally, areas that they burned more recently and then burned again. Those are the areas you will see regeneration, but it's often non-native plants. So there are a lot of areas closer to Ventura. Like if you go to Arroyo Verde Park, there are areas that the Thomas fire was just too soon after them, and what you'll see is that black mustard, invasive grasses like wild oats, they will do really well in those areas that have burned. They burned 15 years ago and then they burned again in the Thomas fire. There's some of those places around Ojai. But when I'm out in the mountains, especially in areas like most of what I just showed you, it hadn't in the Thomas Fire area, hadn't burned since 1985. So it was a 32-year fire interval. And it was doing really well, even though it's kind of on the shorter end of that interval, the natural interval. The regrowth was really good. Generally, what I say is actually this doesn't sound right to a lot of people, but the longer Chaparral, especially, can go without fire, the better it will be able to recover after a fire. And that's because you're building up that seed bank. Those resprouting species are putting a lot of carbon into their root systems. And you're building up enough vegetation so that it'll be hot enough that it'll stimulate native seed germination, and it'll kill non-native seeds that might be in the system. But yeah, you go closer to Ventura, like right on the edge of town, you'll see some places that aren't regenerating as well from a native plant perspective, and some areas right around Ojai. But other than that, out in most of the watershed, I would say it's regrowing really, really spectacularly.
Thank you.
Andy, I have a question.
Go ahead, Lynn.
This is Lynn Rodriguez. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was wonderful. I have a question about something that happened in our area after the Thomas Fire, where people went up and did their seed bombing, well-meaning residents wanting to see the color back right away, and probably also putting in seeds that are not appropriate for the area. What does the Forest Service do to try to prevent some of that? Or how do you educate people about that?
Well, I'll let Yanni later, he can maybe mention if the Forest Service is tries to prevent people from doing that. But yeah, I mean, I think most organizations, botanic gardens, most scientists, we're all in agreement about please do not try to reseed after a fire, especially in Chaparral. Not only are you, like you said, you may be bringing in plants that aren't native. People think it's native to California, so it's fine here. Well, it may not be native to your area. It may not even be native to that canyon. I mean, you could be introducing new genetic material into a species, even though it's the same species. You may be messing things up that you don't even realize. But I think the bigger issue is that it's a huge waste of time and money, because if you go and seed bomb after a fire, especially before the first rains, most of that seed is just going to get washed away. The reason that Chaparral, a lot of these plants are so good at coming up from seed is that they've built up this seed bank in the soil. And they are often little mammals, a lot of wood rats, mice. They will actually, they'll cache the seeds in these little clusters deep in the soil. And this is actually, there's some really cool science on this that has found that, like manzanita especially, they rely on this mechanism, because if they're too close to the soil surface, they'll get killed. The seeds will get destroyed by the fire. So there's this really interesting relationship where mammals will bury the seeds and they'll forget about them, or they'll die in the fire, and then the seeds will come, they'll germinate from those little clusters. I didn't show any of that, but I have all these cool pictures of little seedling clusters. You just don't get that when you're throwing seed on top of the soil. These plants did not evolve to drop seed on top of the soil after a fire. The fire comes through, it burns everything. What seed was in the system that's going to germinate is already pretty deep within the soil. So yeah, it's a waste of money. It's a waste of time. And if it does work, it can be a problem. That's the issue.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate the detailed explanation there, Brian. We'll be moving forward now. All right. We got next up is Yanni Schwartz, also known as Jonathan. Excuse me. He's with the Los Padres National Forest, and he's going to discuss the Burned Area Emergency Response, the BEAR program, for post-wildfire assessments. That being said, Yanni, feel free to hit share your screen.
Okay. Thank you for that last presentation. It was good, a good presentation. Share screen. Okay.
All right, it's coming up.
Yeah, we'll go to, excuse me, start.
All right, you're good. We're seeing it. Thanks, Yanni.
Good. And you know what, actually, I'm going to, I don't need to, how do I take off my camera here? That will actually improve the stop video. That I think will improve the connectivity here.
Sounds good. I do the same thing on my end. All right.
Okay. How do I go backwards? Sorry. So once again, my name is Yanni Schwartz. I'm the Minerals and Geology Program Manager for the Los Padres National Forest and the Bear Coordinator. Okay, sorry. It will take me a minute here to figure out the this Zoom business. So in any case, I'm going to give you a short presentation today about the BEAR program. Many people have heard about the BEAR program. Many people get confused between the different rehabilitation programs that we have in the Forest Service and in the federal government after fires. So here, my first slide here is just presenting kind of the three different types of rehabilitation programs that we have after a fire. The first program is related to suppression repair. And suppression repair deals with all the damage that was actually done directly by suppression efforts. And that includes the creation of dozer lines and hand lines, or any damage that was done to fence lines and other infrastructure, again, directly related to efforts that were done during suppression. The second program is the Burnt Area Emergency Response Program, the BEAR, and that's what I'll be talking about today. And then we have also some long-term restoration projects or programs that we do. In other cases, usually down 2, 3, and 4 or 5 years after a fire. So first, what is BEAR? BEAR, again, once again, like everything else in the federal government, is an acronym that stands for Burnt Area Emergency Response. The BEAR program is designed to identify imminent post-fire threats to human life and safety, property and critical resources on federal lands. This is something that I'll kind of emphasize a little bit more later on, because we do have a lot of these, what we define as values at risk of federal lands, and that's where we come and work with other agencies. The BEAR program presents recommendations to mitigate these post-fire threats and takes immediate actions to manage unacceptable risks. And we'll go kind of in detail as to each one of these steps. So basically, towards the end of a wildfire, usually at about 60 to 70, at a stage where the fire is about 60 or 70% contained, there is a team of specialist scientists that come to assess the burnt area and write a report indicating post-fire threats and the recommendations of actions that should take place to prevent any further risk to life, property, and damage to resources. The reason why we usually come towards the end of the fire, it's just because it doesn't make sense to come earlier on when the landscape is still changing and when there's new ground that are burning every day and conditions are just too much in flux. So that's the reason why we come usually towards kind of the end of the fire. I will give an example today of the Thomas fire, how some things were actually dealt with a little bit differently. The actions that to stabilize and prevent so the team recommendations might include actions to stabilize and prevent unacceptable degradations to natural and cultural resources, and to minimize threats to life and property resulting from the effects of post-wildfire events as rainstorms. So really, this program is really focused, it funds and it takes care of all kinds of issues that are post-fire, related to post-fire issues, but it's really focused on threats that are associated directly with rainstorms that now are going to hit this burnt landscape and how this landscape is going to respond. Emergency stabilizations actions must take place 1 year following containment of wildfire and documented in a BEAR plan. So that's just part of the rules that we are guided by. Some of these specialists or scientists that usually participate in a bear team include a hydrologist, soil scientist, and geologist. These are the kind of the core of the team, which are usually related to the physical sciences. And in addition to that, we'll have wildlife biologists, fishery experts, botanists, foresters, engineers, archaeologists, GIS experts, and others. It all depends by what kind of resources we have out there in that specific fire. The size of the team can flux between, I've been on bear teams where we were 3 people. Brian mentioned the cave fire last year above Goleta there. I was the team leader on that. I was a geologist. And in addition to me, there was only a soil scientist, hydrologist, and we also had a GIS person that helped us with all the maps and everything. But that's an example of a small team, all depending by the size and the complexity of the fire. This picture here is from 2009 from the station fire that impacted the Angeles National Forest. At the time was the largest fire in Southern California. Here we had about 70 people in this bear team, 4 or 5 people in each discipline. So all depending by the size and the complexity of the fire. Now, each one of these disciplines will write their own report, including the threats associated to their resources and their recommendations. A final bear report is compiled from all their information, data, and recommendations collected by all the disciplines. Now, the steps that the bear team follows, or the process that we follow, includes first identifying critical values at risk, assess the threats, evaluate the risks that are associated with each one of these VARs, these values at risk, develop a response strategy, and most importantly, at the end, implement the strategy. These assignments are usually very intense. They're usually maybe 10, 12, 14 days, but we basically working around the clock because we also have all kinds of, again, timelines that we have to stand to. We need to submit our final report up to 7 days after containment. But the main reason is that in regards to the 5th steps here, to the implementation, the whole idea is to implement these mitigations before the rainstorms come in. And as Brian mentioned before, some of our biggest fires, especially here in Southern California, are actually in September, October, November. In the Thomas fire, it was in December. So it's right before the rainstorm. So we need to move really fast here. Some of the values, examples of some of the values at risk that we're looking at. First of all, obviously, human life and safety, property that might include roads, trails, structures, and other facilities, water quality and quantity, threats to soil productivity, threats to cultural resources, threats to wildlife and habitat. We monitor native plant recovery, rare plants, and issues with invasive plants. So we monitor and remove. This program will fund the monitoring and the removal of invasive plants after fires. Again, something that Brian mentioned in his previous presentation here. For each one of these values at risk, we'll develop this huge, after like 4 or 5 days into the assignment, we'll start collecting all the values at risk. We'll develop this huge spreadsheet, and then we'll go through each one of these values at risk, going through this matrix that we developed, that first we're looking at the probability of damage or loss, the probability that that damage or loss will occur to each one of these values at risk. And then if it does occur, we assess the magnitude of consequences. Is it going to be major, moderate, or minor? And this is kind of guiding us later on in regards to our recommendations and to our mitigations. Yeah. And then beyond that, obviously, there's many values at risk that are below Forest Service lands, below federal lands, downstream of the burnt areas, that are completely legitimate, but are outside of our jurisdiction. I have to say that in the past, for example, on the station fire in 2009 on the Angeles National Forest, we spent weeks and weeks going every community, every neighborhood, every house along the Highway 210 at the foothills there that was impacted by the station fire, Altadena, Pasadena, all those communities along the 210. And we literally evaluated every address, every house, every structure that potentially could be impacted by high flows, debris flows, rockfall, and so on, associated with the station fire. Later on, we got the direction that we really need to stop this very detailed assessment, because we're actually stepping out of our jurisdiction. And nowadays, the state of California actually has these work teams, similar concept to the BEAR teams, that specifically come and go through the same process, but evaluating and giving recommendations for downstream values at risk, usually associated with private lands. In our assessment, we do look at these values at risk. We do mention them in our report, but not in great detail, and we won't give very specific recommendations as well. We work very closely, especially in the cases of those downstream off forest land values at risk. We work very closely with other federal agencies as the NRCS, the National Weather Service, USGS, the Bureau of Reclamation, FEMA. But even more than that, we work very closely with state, county, and local agencies, emergency response agencies, and so on. So now in my position as the BEAR coordinator for the Los Padres National Forest, I work very, very closely, especially the first year after a fire, but in some cases, until today, I'm still communicating and working very closely with Santa Barbara flood control, the city of Montecito, city of Santa Barbara, and so on, in regards to the Thomas fire. I studied the debris flows that impacted the Montecito after the Thomas fire for about 2 years. I actually was involved in a lot of monitoring of the revegetation after the fire. So it was very interesting for me to see some of the slides that Brian was presenting there. And all of this in order to assess potential debris flows in the second and the third year after the fire. So some of these threats exist for 3, 4, 5 years until we have fully revegetation of that burnt landscape. And this is where we work very closely with these other agencies. Right now, I'm working very closely with the Monterey County OES and other agencies in regards to the Dolan fire that impacted the Big Sur coastline. Some of the specific geological hazards that I look at as a geologist on these BEAR teams, I kind of wear different hats. I work as a geologist on bear teams nationwide. But then again, here on any fire that will occur here on the Los Padres, first of all, I'm the bear coordinator. So I'll do all the interagency coordination and so on. But as a geologist, some of the most important geological hazards that I'm looking at are associated with dry ravel, rolling rocks, landslides, and debris flows. And here I'll just give some examples of each one of them. So this is after or during the Thomas Fire along Highway 33. You can see here the dry ravel that is impacting Highway 33 in this case. But in many other cases, all of this material is going to end up in the channels and then just contribute to the rest of the material that is going to be mobilized by either hyper-concentrated floods or debris flows. Rockfall impacting roads, again here impacting some of the backcountry roads on the Angeles National Forest. But again, this same material will end up in most cases down in channels, and once again will be part of the larger material that will be mobilized by these flows. Either the initiation of landslides or reinitiation of dormant landslides is very typical after wildfires, and this is something that we look at very closely. And then the most destructive geological hazard that we follow very closely is debris flows. And this is just one of many pictures of my documentation of the debris flows that impacted Montecito. We know that these debris flows, in this case here, damaged or destroyed hundreds of houses, killed 23 people, and created millions and millions of dollars of damage. So this is one of the most destructive geological hazards that I specifically study very closely. I'll give here a whole set of pictures, kind of just take you through my personal experience through at least the first couple of weeks of the Thomas Fire. So this is on December 4th, 2017, at about, I think, 10 o'clock at night, a photo that I was taking from the roof of my house. I live in Ventura, just below the hills, and this is how it looked that same first night. The next morning, driving to my office into Ojai, the fire burning through Sulphur Mountain. I spent a few hours in my office in Ojai there, and we basically lost power. There wasn't any reason for me to stay there. And at the same time, this is just the following day on December 5th. It was still pretty chaotic. At the same time, the incident command post was established in the fairgrounds in Ventura. So I decided to go down and continue working from there. This is a picture as I'm heading out through downtown Ojai. At that stage, the valley of Ojai was pretty chaotic because there was a mandatory evacuation of the whole valley. Highway 150 down to Santa Paula was closed. Highway 150 Highway 33 that I came in the morning from Ventura and down to Ventura was closed already. So the two only other exits out of the valley were either Highway 33 going up into the backcountry of Ojai and down to the Cuyama Valley. Not too many people were taking that. Most people were on Highway 150 going up and towards the Carpinteria. So that was bumper to bumper. People were barely moving. I was stuck there for a few hours. This is how it looked a few hours later when the fire was really coming close. Eventually, I made my way down to the Ventura Fairgrounds and started initiating my first assessment, bear assessment of the Thomas fire. And this is a situation where not a typical situation where I was describing before, where we usually really initiate a whole bear team at about 60 or 70% containment. Here it's like literally the following day, but most of the ground around the valley of Ojai was burnt already just a few days into the fire. And we had already forecast of some rains that were supposed to come about 2 weeks down the road. So what we decided to do is to initiate a very fast bear assessment, a small bear team and a very fast bear assessment just for the valley of Ojai, because we had very high concerns for life, property, and infrastructure in the valley of Ojai. And then that would be phase one. And then later on, towards the end of the fire, we would initiate phase two, which would be a full-blown bear team and bear assessment for the whole burnt landscape. When we go through these assessments, we look at the landscape through the lens of watersheds. So you see here the valley of Ojai, we delineated all the watersheds that flow into the valley of Ojai and down, basically all draining into the Ventura River. And we start assessing each one of these values at risk and all the different elements that we're looking through through these different watersheds. So one of the first things that we do is we produce a soil burn severity. We get the initial product that we get is actually called a BARC. Again, an acronym that stands that it's basically a satellite imagery of this burnt landscape that went through some kind of a modification and has a representation of soil burn severity. But we need to take that satellite image and actually verify it on the ground. This is the outcome of our final soil burn severity. Even though, as Brian was mentioning in the previous presentation, Chaparral tends to burn all the way down to the ground and leave behind, again, whatever people tend to call like a moonscape landscape or whatever, a moon landscape. It is mostly burns and creates a moderate soil burn severity. And that's where people get a little bit confused between the term soil burn severity and veg severity. So the vegetation was highly burnt all the way down to the minerals, but the soil burn severity is whatever we're looking at. That's actually the changes in the physical and biological changes in the properties of the soil itself. Chaparral usually burns and creates a moderate soil burn severity. When it comes to the potential production of debris flows, it doesn't really matter if it's a moderate soil burn severity or high soil burn severity. I'll talk a little bit about the debris flow model afterwards, but that model actually evaluates moderate and high soil burn severity as equal. But in any case, this is one of the first products that we produce. Then again, I, as a geologist, I look at the geology map here and all the geological units, the type of rocks that we have there, types of soil, and the potential for all these geological hazards that I mentioned before. We're looking very closely at the slopes. Here you can see that major parts of the slopes, especially along Nordorf Ridge on the north side of the valley, of very steep slopes, was 60+% slopes. And then we take some of these products, we take the soil burn severity, the slope map, and so on. We send it to USGS, and they run their debris flow model. We get a whole bunch of different products back from them, but the three basic products that we get from them are the debris flow probability, the probability of debris flows initiating in each one of these drainages that was impacted by the fire. Again, you can see here that they mostly the Sulphur Mountain Ridge did not come out with very high probabilities, and that's related to the soil burn severity, the slopes, and so on. But major part of the drainages on the north slope, on the Nordoff and the Topo side of the valley, produce very high probabilities of debris flows. And it goes a little bit more complicated at all here. It's the intensity storm that I chose was 28 millimeters per hour, but we get these, this model is splitting all of these products all the way from 12 millimeters an hour all the way up to 40 millimeters an hour. In any case, the second product, the basic product that we get from them is a predicted volume from each one of these drainages, either under 1,000 cubic meters, between 1,000 and 10,000 cubic meters, between 10,000 and 100,000 cubic meters, and over 100,000 cubic meters. I always say the map that I look at the most is actually the probability, because I always say, you know, if I'm a homeowner, I don't really care if it's going to be 1,000 or 10,000 cubic meter debris flow. If any of those is going to impact my house, it's going to most likely take my house out. So, and then the third product is a combined hazard, which is basically taking the probabilities and the predicted volumes and kind of putting them together. Now, by the way, again, the different products that we get from them, some of them are presented in basins, and I believe that most of you, that's what you're familiar with, because that's usually what is released to kind of the public. It's a little bit easier for people that are not in this disciplines, for non-geologists, to understand the big picture when it's presented in polygons, in basins. I like to look at this product here, which is really showing me every specific segment and its probability or its predicted volume or so on. So this is something that you might not be familiar with, but this is something that I work with very closely. And so then during this very fast assessment, about a week or 8 days of assessment that we did, again, focusing as the Thomas Fire was exploding all around us, focusing only on the Valley of Ojai, we were kind of driving and taking every dirt road and hiking all the different trails in Upper Ojai and on the Nordoff side, on the south side, looking at all these different things, trying to, again, finalize our soil burn severity and identify values at risk, look at all the different geological hazards and so on. So here again, another example of dry ravel that we encountered along Highway 33 as we're driving up towards Rose Valley. Dry ravel and rolling rocks just above the Wheeler Gorge campground. So obviously that was a concern for us, that campground as a value at risk. The bridge of Highway 33 going up through Wheeler Gorge up towards the Rose Valley. I was very concerned about it, about the potential for debris flows here. Coming down, this is the North Fork of Matilaha, coming down this fork here and impacting this bridge here. Yeah, in any case, I won't continue there. Driving up Highway 33 again on the way towards Rose Valley. Brian was showing some pictures later on of these slopes here. This is just below dry lakes, the dry lake ridgeline. Then in addition to that, on these assignments, we also usually take helicopter flights just because we can never get to see all the ground. Usually these fires include huge amounts of areas, very remote areas. So we do part of our assessment from the air. This is a kind of flying out of Santa Paula, up along the Santa Paula Creek. You can see here the whole Sulphur Mountain ridgeline that was burned during the first day. An interesting fact here is actually all the agricultural land here, these groves, were actually also behaving a little bit as a buffer. So those are usually during fires, farmers will tend to put on their sprinklers and water all their groves. And in that way, you have just a higher moisture in these groves, and which later on behave as buffers. Going up this Santa Paula Creek, the Thomas Aquinas College, this is specifically where the Thomas fire initiated, up around here, around this curve here, was very close to the Thomas Aquinas College, and that's where the name came from. Flying over the Nordoff Ridge, the old watch out tower out there. Again, me as a geologist, I'm looking at all the loose materials that now lost all its supporting vegetation and is now mobilized down with gravitation down into the drainages on both sides of this ridge line here, down into the Ojai Valley on one side and down into Rose Valley on the other side. Highway 33, just above Wheeler Gorge. Look at all the big, large boulders. These big, large boulders came here during past mobilization events, during past debris flow events. So all the huge amount of material and large boulders that we have here made me very concerned as to the potential of, again, remobilization of all of this material down this creek here into the north fork of Matilaha and down into the Ventura River. Flying down Wheeler Gorge, assessing some of the private properties out there, and then in the Ojai Valley itself, going through kind of the front country, looking at all the different slopes that are directly flowing into the drainages and slopes directly above Ojai, the community of Ojai. This is Shelf Road, the Ojai Preserve, excuse me, the Ojai Preserve, yes, I think that's how it's called, the Ojai Valley Preserve. Senior Creek, which is one of the major contributors to the Ventura River. Again, looking down into the creek itself, I identify all this large boulders and lots of material that is now available to be transported and be mobilized with either a hyper-concentrated flow or with a debris flow. Looking towards the Topo Bluff and all the slopes to kind of the northeast of the valley, you can see lots of soil erosion, just kind of very shallow erosion. All of this is going to be exacerbated now after the fire. And again, this material is going to end up down in channels that could contribute to debris flows. Every evening, we come back to whatever we call our bear den. Each specialist scientist is kind of working on his report on all the data that they're putting together, all the data that we collect during the day and starting to write our reports. As I said, these are very intense assignments, working around the clock for 10, 12, 14 days. At the end of the assignment, we have two closeout meetings final presentation. One is internal for our forest supervisor and our leadership team. And this here is a picture of an external final meeting to other cooperators. As I said, we work very closely with all the local, state agencies, members from the public, community members. We give them as well this our final findings presentation. This is a picture after the Soberanes fire a few years ago. And this is maybe what you're a little bit familiar with, how this debris flow map looks like in polygons. Again, here it's actually the segments and the polygons. But this is later on, after we carried our phase 2 assessment and we assessed the whole Thomas fire burned area. This is just an example of the debris flow probability out of the whole fire area. And that is what I have for today. Not sure how we're doing on time here, but
oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Very great presentation. I appreciate you taking the time there. Oh, looks like maybe I should open up my camera here. I'm coming in. There we go. Thanks so much, Yanni, for that presentation. Very, very interesting to see how you guys go about that. I'm sure flying around in the helicopters must be real fun too. Maybe kind of scary over mountain ranges. You get some pretty bad updrafts. That being said, do we have any kind of questions for the next few minutes? We'll open it up. Feel free to unmute. All right. Well, it looks like, oh, did we get someone to unmute here? No? All right. Well, thanks so much, Yanni. If anyone has any additional questions, please follow up with me and I'll share his contact information, and I'm sure he'd be happy to reach out and communicate with you. One last time, if anyone had any questions. All righty. Well, thank you again, Yanni, taking the time. You enjoy the weekend. We will move on to our next presentation here. Looking like we're good on time. All right, Christopher, he is with the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council. He's going to discuss Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council's actions and what they're doing in the Ventura watershed to prevent and mitigate wildfire. All right, Christopher, at this point, feel free to share your screen.
All right, well, here's that moment of fear that old men have about, is this going to work? So tell me if this is working.
All right, we're going, and you're looking good. Perfect. We can see your screen. Yep.
There you go. Wonders never cease. All right, obviously I'm Christopher Danch. I'm the Executive Director of the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council. And just a brief history about the Fire Safe Council, because a lot of people actually don't know much about it. We have been serving the area for 20 years, having been founded in 2000. And over those 20 years, we've managed 26 federally funded grants and other grants. But the federal grants have totaled over 1.3 million and have funded a wide variety of education and wildfire action programs here in the Ojai Valley area. We've created online resources, and of course, we have developed a wide network of partnerships, beginning with the Ventura County Fire, U.S. Forest Service, and others. And but it's been done pretty quietly, and we've gone about our business where a lot of people were not even aware that this work was going on, other than those that were directly contacted through presentations and the like, or vegetation management projects near or on their properties. And through the years, we have felt that Ojai Valley has done a good job of that. But the Thomas Fire showed us something that we hadn't seen before. And anybody who's lived here long enough to have lived through the '85 Wheeler Fire, those were two wildly different events, though they burned almost identical acreage. And so we have some new challenges coming our way, and our preparedness as a community proved not to be enough during events like the Thomas Fire. So clearly that we have climate change impacts, which includes, as shown on Bryant's chart there is that we're moving toward longer fire seasons, and we're looking at changes in the autumn weather that we're having. So we're having more extreme events, Santa Ana winds that drive the kinds of fire that do the damage. We see vegetation accumulations despite the fact of our drought, but that also comes from other fire suppression efforts. We see a change in the wildfire behavior where it is more erratic and intense. We have the wildland urban interface, or the WUI, that keeps expanding. And of course, we have increasing liability, risk, and costs. Now, this is back in September, this one last statistic, but we can see in the 2020 fire season ended in September with a representing from 1970 a 400% increase in fires across the USA. So clearly more has to be done, and our level of community preparedness, capacity, and resilience must adapt to this change. And we must move towards being, a more, I want to discuss in a little bit, a fire adapted community. So after the Thomas fire, the Fire Safe Council was approached by various stakeholders, including County Fire, the city, and others, to take on a leadership role in creating a more comprehensive, holistic, community-based, community-driven risk mitigation strategy for the whole area. And so we took on that leadership role in 2019. That's when I came on board as executive director. And we took the first step of developing what we call the roadmap, which is a planning guidance document for the larger strategy. And while that is still being drafted, the work that went into it has been completed. First thing we recognize is that there are limitations with the existing planning documents that are traditionally found. And that is, we have the unit strategic, that's a CAL FIRE unit, strategic plan with the Ventura County Fire Protection District. And then the last time we did what's called a Community Wildfire Protection Plan, or CWPP, was in 2010. And that was actually prepared by the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council for the county. CWPPs are useful documents and an important exercise for any community that is exposed to wildfire risk to undertake, but it has limitations. One is that it's very fire agency focused, right? It comes from an agency perspective, despite the title of Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And generally, given the funding that's available, contains the three essential elements, and that is hazard analysis and vegetation management, and to a much smaller degree, structural hardening. But most of it goes toward vegetation management and a hazard analysis. So what we want to do is increase community capacity, which CWPPs really, in their traditional form, don't really do. They don't provide for how a community itself, apart from the public safety agencies, actually can be better prepared, better respond during, and quicker recover thereafter from a major wildfire or other natural disaster event. So that's what we looked out to do. So, and CWPs, because they focus on these elements, they don't have the holistic or the interconnection of all the different kinds of needs and concerns and values that we want to protect. So we sought to do that through this roadmap into the larger strategy. We also start from the perspective in our area that wildfire is inevitable and necessary. We live in a fire-dependent ecosystem, that only a very small percentage of the fires are deemed uncontrollable. And that Thomas fire is one of those uncontrollable fires. But the key fact is that this small percentage, anywhere from 2 to 5% of these uncontrollable fires, do 95% of the damage. So you need, and what we've witnessed during the Thomas fire is how public safety agencies are instantly overwhelmed in an uncontrollable fire, hence the name. So a community level response capacity is needed for those catastrophic fires that do almost all the damage. So the goals that we set for ourselves in the wildfire risk mitigation strategy are shown here. And we want to build whole community capacities and develop a culture of resiliency and become a truly fire adapted community. So what does that mean to be a fire adapted community? Well, here's a quote from the U.S. Forest Service, which captures it well. But I guess it can be put in one sentence, and that is that you learn to live with fire and minimize the risk you experience from those fires in a fire-dependent ecosystem. So you have to tie what we do as our community to the impacts on our ecosystem as well, which is why we don't want to go in and bulldoze down all the chaparral, because it provides other useful ecosystem services that we depend on entirely. But what's interesting is that a fire adapted community is one that learns to live within its environment, which is we want to be more resilient overall as a community and as residents of this area. Then we need, and then our species generally, is we have to learn how to live and coexist with our environment. And obviously, our firefighting and everything else has gone the way and we've gone in the industrialized world, and that is the command and control. Well, now we're facing situations we can no longer command and control. So maybe we need to grow up here a little bit and learn how to become truly coexist with our environment. And that's the beauty of working towards a fire adapted community, because the one that is truly fire adapted is a more truly resilient community, which is where we need to head. Now, the roadmap went through many different things. When we do finally finish it, COVID kind of didn't help in our planning to get this done, will be posted on the website. People can download it and take a look at it. And we went through a number of different approaches, and one was people on the working group that did this, we brought in what's called the disaster risk reduction and capacity building field materials that help us put this together. That'll be more fully described in the roadmap. And then we also did a public survey that we took a lot of data from. We got enough responses to make it statistically significant, and that has gone into our planning. Out of this work we did came these following major concerns. And of course, we realized like emergency communications, for example, people here realized that that was actually went south during the Thomas Fire. I, as a resident here of the Ojai Valley, I didn't know what was going on. And I think that was a complaint we got through the survey. And we saw that also affected interagency communications as well, because we have critical points of failure all along our systems that a major wildfire event can interrupt. That we have limited evacuation routes. So we need some evacuation improvements, which also includes real-time emergency communication and alternatives that we are prepared to take, whether it be stay at home, stay and defend. We need to examine these kinds of alternatives, establish community disaster evacuation centers and how we maintain those, and how we look at other temporary refuge areas, various things that we can do that can give us many more options and much better ability to respond during a fast-moving, uncontrolled fire. Loss of power to critical facilities. We have a large per capita number of people in vulnerable populations, which includes our elderly, our disabled, our non-English speaking residents, and other people with what's called access and functional needs. And then we need improved, in our Ojai Valley area, we need improved emergency planning to address all of these, particularly at the city level. And then, of course, overall improved resiliency. Now, the work that we've been doing in the past, we're going to continue to do as funding is available. We've always been working long and hard on enhancing and improving defensible space, doing lots of public education through the and involving stakeholder engagement. We're also in the middle of a much needed website upgrade. Our website is old and tired, kind of like me. And we And I guess that's why it isn't getting done like it should, because I think I'm the weak link in that deal right now. But much of what I'm talking about will be on the new website, which I think will be much more interactive and much more informative. Out of our roadmap and this holistic approach that we have taken, we have identified a number of priority projects that we are, as best we can and as funding is available and manpower is available, to pursue. One I'm going to talk about in a little more detail, and that's our community supported grazing program. But I'll quickly go through some of these others to give you an idea of how we're approaching this and the kinds of work that we think are necessary to reach those goals that I just described. One is a fine scale risk mapping program, and that is, we have the CAL FIRE FRAP maps, which give us the various severity zones. We are all well aware that we are surrounded by very high to high fire hazard severity zones, kind of defines the area, but doesn't do much for local risk planning. When you look at a map like that, it's just orange and red. What does that tell us? Very little. So we need to do fine scale risk mapping. That's an expensive proposition. We have been waiting to do that in collaboration with Ventura County Fire with the next CAL FIRE grant cycle, which has been, due to COVID, been postponed indefinitely, should have already have occurred, so sometime in 2021. We're looking at innovative ways to improve public emergency communications that's community-based. And so we have identified volunteer geospatial information and crowdsourced data as an approach to doing this. This is something that's been a lot of research has been done on around the world. We currently have a pending National Science Foundation grant, which we'll learn about any day now, that we have partnered with UCSB and USGS Service and a private industry engineering partner to take the first step on that. We are confident it's an excellent proposal, but then given the number of applicants and the number of awardees, it's a statistical long shot. But we will keep working in that area because I think it holds great promise. Of course, we have a need for structural hardening to continue. We have sought grants in the past to do this. We have yet to receive any of them, but we will continue those efforts. And a big issue, of course, is retrofitting existing residents and structures, and not just new construction or extensive remodels going forward. There's lots of work on data collection. So we have a plan to do that. We also had initiate a community microgrid for critical facilities projects. That's so far our funding efforts have not proven successful to do the initial pre-feasibility study, but we are continuing to work on that. We want to do, and we have applied, but we haven't got the funds yet, wildfire evacuation or transit vulnerability assessment. And while there are transit assessments being done, and we do work with Ventura County Transportation Commission, this is a very specialized kind of assessment that looks towards things that ordinary traffic studies don't do. It will also inform us on things such as evacuation alternatives and evacuation timing and direction. And then we had a failure of critical water infrastructure during the Thomas Fire. So we need to take a look at that. Along with the contribution of agricultural wetted zones as performing a protective barrier around the city. We also have formed a group on preparedness in terms of our emotional and psychological well-being, which for me was much more of an impact than I thought it would be. And that's something that when we can get the funding, we'll certainly work on. We're also part of a working group with a project called WRAP, which is Wildfire Risk and Asset Protection. And that's working with the California Insurance Department, a nonprofit that started the initiative, policy holders, and other people in the insurance industry and other fire safe councils. And looking at how to tie structural hardening and those kinds of improvements, how can we tie that to increasing the affordability and the availability of homeowners insurance. Our role right now in the working group is primarily just giving information and taking information and learning more about the challenges that this presents. And then finally, the Central Ventura County Fire Safe Council has received funding to update our 2010 CWPP. That process will be starting at the beginning of the year, and we are collaborating with Central Ventura County Fire Safe Council to do that. And the work we're doing on the roadmap will be rolled into that. One of the programs, and I just want to stop now also say that our service area, which is sort of self-defined, includes the bulk of the Ventura River watershed. Also roughly corresponds to the Ojai Valley area general area plan, but it extends up towards into all the watershed, the sub-watersheds up into Matilaha, up into Rose Valley, and down the Ventura River over to Foster Park, Casita Springs, and over towards Santa Paula, towards Steckel. So that's our planning area that the roadmap is covering. One of the programs we're beginning is one we're very excited about is the Ojai Valley Community Supported Grazing Program. This is modeled in part after a successful program by Marin Fire Safe Council up north. And while we use grazing now to do vegetation management and fuel reductions, this can be greatly expanded, but also it can be done through what we call prescribed grazing, which is take sophisticated operators to do. And it's looking at the questions of what are the land management objectives in the use of grazing animals, and what is the best prescription to reach those management objectives, which includes the species, whether it's goats or sheep, or what kinds of goats and sheep, their number, their intensity, their duration, their movements on the land, other protective measures. What are those goals? And that's what we intend to bring. Ultimately, we're looking at the grazing program, build a protective barrier of vegetation management around the valley, and one in which we can hopefully be as continuous as possible, where we can drop off the animals at one place and then we can pick them up at the end. So like from Upper Ojai down to Casita Springs without them getting on a truck, which is a big expense in moving animals. So we're very excited about this program, and we've gotten a start on it already. It does provide an ecologically sound vegetation management option, and put that in our toolbox. As our area has a large WUI area involved, that's where our focus is going to be in terms of priority. And it has other ecological benefits in terms of restoration of land health, and done properly and over time can contribute toward ecological health, principally in increased carbon sequestration, which also has increased water retention, which increases vegetation wettedness, and therefore increases our ability to withstand wildfire. And of course, it has a whole long-range program of creating more economic development here as well. And our step on this is that our project director has established a base of operations up in Upper Ojai. We believe we have our first demonstration site, which will be the Christian Moody Foundation of America property along Highway 150-33. We expect to begin that, and we're beginning to put together our fundraising campaign, which will at first pay for our mapping, which is in partnership with the Ventura County Fire Department, looking at landowner agreements, put together a RFP package that goes out to grazing contractors, and then award those contracts. And ultimately, the community supported portion of this would go towards helping to make sure that we hit all the priority areas that we need if in fact there is not land or other money available to pay for this grazing. So this is a program that we're very excited about, and you'll be hearing more about in the near future. Now, this kind of long-range holistic planning takes a consistent baseline to funding apart from grants and donations. And I can say that I've spent the entire year on this, and most of it's been pro bono. And I can tell you that's not sustainable from an organizational standpoint, and certainly not one from a personal standpoint. So we've got to find a way of doing this. And this is the big issue, that because we need this to support the kind of ongoing work that's necessary, because these are all things that take time to put together, take time to do, and money, and then have to be monitored. And it's a iterative process as we move along. These fires have brought on a flood of applicants. We have the number of fire safe councils, for example, has greatly expanded in recent years. Traditionally, the funding for the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council, as many other fire safe councils, has come from the USDA state fire assistance grants. And those have actually decreased in the amount available, and the number of applicants has increased. If we can take the last round, and Mala, who's from the California Fire Safe Council, which is the manager of that grant program, can attest. We have what, 247 fire safe councils in California. Out of that grant, 3 fire safe councils and only 9 applicants got awarded. So a lot of people, including the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council, don't get anything from that. Very difficult to do this. So we need to move towards something that gives us, we take this kind of stuff seriously and be able to fund it. Now, we did had hopes in Measure C here in Ojai that would increase the transient occupancy tax that was passed in a special election, and funding from that. The increased funding was also dedicated to be dedicated to wildfire protection, including our efforts. And of course, COVID and the shutdown has suspended that for the time being, though it's hopefully will come back. Another possibility is what Marin County did, and that is to pass a very small but effective parcel tax. So that was, they first did a WUI interface, WUI ordinance that we have very similar here about how we do that. They formed a special district under a JPA, and then they had a special ballot. It did pass by a large majority and went into effect in June of this year. Their anticipated raise for that would be just shy of $24 million for doing that, and it's a 10-year program. And something like that needs to be examined, and its feasibility here in our area to do that. But it also doesn't answer the questions of how we do the actual project infrastructure work itself. How do we do the things like, structural hardening that is extremely expensive that people cannot afford otherwise? One approach innovative approach we're taking is through green bonds through the State Treasurer's program, working with State Treasurer's Office, IBank, and the Pollution Control Financing Authority. And we have put out through our representatives in Sacramento that they want green bonds to create greater community resilience and turn investment, particularly large institutional investment, towards these kinds of goals, which is a shift from where we've been, and a very important shift. We've managed to convince the State Treasurer's Office that fire safe councils are really unique organizations looking at long-term resilience and impacts from from fires and other impacts that we have, and that we could take fire safe councils, their community level projects, and aggregate those into a single bond offering. But of course, getting those projects to a bond-worthy phase where you have the permitting and the CEQA, all that stuff is done. That is a funding gap that's very difficult to overcome, and has basically stopped this from happening in communities all over the state. And so, in discussions with IBank, we were looking at acquiring stimulus funding to cover that funding gap. IBank was very receptive to that. And then the whole thing went down the tubes when COVID shutdown hit. And the Climate Catalyst Fund that was the source of those stimulus funds was shut down, suspended by the state. But we are now back in communication. Looks like the fund's going to be back in place. And we're going to move forward with this funding concept. And we hope that we can find that this is a way of dramatically shifting the way money is available to communities to do the kind of long range, large scale efforts that they need to build resilient communities. And with that, I think my time is about up. So obviously there's more to talk about, but I'm open to questions at this time, and thank you for paying attention to the presentation.
All right, thanks so much for that. Great presentation. We appreciate understanding what's going on with your organization here. That being said, let's, if anyone has any kind of questions, we're open up for a brief few minutes here. Give it just a moment. All right, looks like we're doing good. I always look at people, and when people don't have any questions, I always look at it as, you did such a great job at explaining. So thanks so much, Christopher, for that.
Hopefully that's the case.
Oh, it was perfect. Any follow-up, you guys see his information on the screen, feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to connect you. All righty. Well, moving on forward, we have our, let's see, I believe it's our last presentation of the day here. Yes, the Ventura River In-Stream Flow Project. Now, who's sharing their screen on that one for the executive team? Is it Jamie, Regina, Tom?
It's me.
All right, Jamie, all you.
Okie dokie. All right, hopefully, Andy, you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Looking good.
Okay. I want to go ahead and let's see here. Give me a moment, please. There was some internet instability there, so I think that I'm going to go ahead and kill my video just so I can stabilize the signal. But hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Whiteford. I'm the district scientist with Ventura County Resource Conservation District. And so with that, I'm just going to turn myself into a disembodied voice. All right, so to get started, first of all, thank you, Andy, for giving us the time. Thank you to the council for having us. And a huge thanks to the previous speakers. Those presentations were fantastic. Just a heads up, my presentation is going to swerve quite a bit off the topic of wildfire. But I hope everyone finds my talk to be informative nonetheless. Okay, so that said, my objective today is to update the council on the Ventura Watershed Flow Enhancement and Water Resiliency Framework Project, or VRWC as we like to call it. And I want to provide a summary of the progress that we've made. The goal of the update is to enhance the council's understanding of the project and also build broader stakeholder support for this effort. A more specific objective for my talk today is to enlist participants for subcommittees whose task will be to vet the VRWC Watershed Action Toolkit, which I'll discuss more later. To accomplish all of that in the time that we've got, I've broken my talk up into two sections, starting with updates, as I said, on VRWC project progress, which will then be followed by an explanation of the Watershed Action Toolkit, along with the request for Watershed Council members to help with the development of the tools that are part of that larger toolkit. To kick things off, I would like to point out the VRWC executive team here, us at the Ventura County Resource Conservation District, along with Watershed Progressive, Tom Hicks, Eagle Aerial, and Flip Labs. Of course, none of this would really move forward if we didn't have a whole suite of project partners or project proponents, as I usually call them, shown here. And then, of course, a great big thank you to the Wildlife Conservation Board for funding the VRWC project. All right, so with that, I'd like to go ahead and figure out how to move to the next slide. Hold on one second, please.
Might be able to just hit the arrow button, right?
Yeah, generally speaking, but I've kind of switched out onto. Oh, sorry. You'd think I'd have this all figured out as often as I do this. Okie dokie. So for a quick, first a quick summary of what the VRIF project is. And I have pulled language directly out of the project agreement and the work plan, which is that highlighted text that you see on the left, because I just want to make sure everybody understands, you know, what this project really is all about. We, as the executive team, put together a diagram about the project that's shown on the right side of the screen, which we've presented to the general public and to others involved in the project that aren't part of the project team. So I've highlighted the important points on the left, and to summarize these points somewhat quickly, I'm just going to say the purpose of VRIF is to first create a framework, which is simply a collection of voluntary in-stream flow enhancement and water conservation actions. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we need to create a framework. The second thing we need to do is we need to shepherd these actions through project planning to, one, understand the in-stream flow and water resiliency values of those actions, and two, to prepare for future implementation of those actions that are part of that planning aspect of the projects. Third, we need to assess the information that comes about from planning so that we can provide stakeholders in the watershed recommendations regarding how they should go about ranking or prioritizing those various watershed actions. Okay? And then fourthly, we want to pursue outreach and education to build community understanding and support for those actions. Okay, so this is what VRIF is in a nutshell, a collection of different processes all integrated together into this one project that is then going to all come together in what we call the framework. So the objective of the framework is to delineate possible voluntary actions such that, if adopted, these voluntary actions maximize the availability of water and achieve the desired in-stream flow enhancements. And again, this is language that's all sort of encapsulated here in the actual grant documents. Anyway, but before I discuss the framework any further, so this part here, I want to provide very brief updates on these other intertwined efforts, such as education outreach, collaborations, and planning and design. And I'm going to start up here at the top right, education and outreach. So again, I'm in sort of the project progress update section. So starting here with education and outreach, I'm going to speak on behalf of the executive team. I acknowledged them very briefly at the opening slide. I'm going to start with Flip Labs. So Flip Labs is responsible for stakeholder engagement and strategic planning. They've been working to develop our communication plan, and they've led workshops to identify how to reach those that are least likely to participate in water conservation outreach. So, those in the watersheds who rent, or, they're elderly, or they're BIPOC parts, those types of water consumers who may feel marginalized. So Flip Labs has done quite a bit of research over a longer period of time, even than this project. And as it turns out, the primary drivers for conservation within this group isn't necessarily environmental. It's actually more about community and social values. And this has all come about through a series of workshops that Flip Labs has put together. And during these workshop series, Flip Labs found actually that games were one of the best mediums to use to speak to these types of community and social values. So based on these insights, Flip Labs has embarked on developing community engagement games to sort of teach about water conservation from a more community and social aspect, not necessarily environmental, like many of us may think of it. And Flip Labs is also using this insight from the workshops to design a community-oriented website, Our Watershed Future, which should become available soon. And again, the purpose behind the game and the website development that Flip Labs has embarked upon is to encourage more civic engagement around water conservation issues, especially among those who feel marginalized by traditional outreach methods. So their next steps is to actually, take this game concept and develop it. And they're also going to, turn a little bit more attention towards those who are likely to participate through online surveys and other means, other more traditional means. So with that, I want to turn my attention to Eagle Ariel, who is also involved in education and outreach. So one aspect of Eagle Ariel's work is to assess satellite imagery to determine the sort of spatial and temporal scales for a lot of the potential tools, where they might be most useful and where it would be most expedient for us to focus our attention. They're also deeply involved in developing an online interface to serve both water providers and water consumers, and that's called WaterView. So the idea is that this tool will make it easier for water providers to deliver content to the consumers while making it easier for the consumer to access information about their individual and aggregate water consumption, while also keeping everything, private. So the goal is to use the tool to visually illustrate, water consumption across user-selected temporal and spatial scales. So it'll be rather interactive in that way, with several goals. One of which is to raise individual water use awareness, to reduce household consumption, but also to raise community water awareness, to help reach collective local, regional, or state water consumption reduction goals. So that is our outreach and education update. I want to next move to our agency landowner collaborations, and this involves another one of our leads. This is led by Tom Hicks over at Hicks Law. And Tom has a focus on protecting the water rights of those individuals who want to implement voluntary conservation efforts. A related effort is the development of voluntary agreement templates that provides a blueprint for how to actually do that. So along with these efforts, Hicks Law also works with the VRIF project executive team, such as myself, to keep us updated on legal and regulatory developments. So, Tom is constantly engaging in conversations with Water Board, with CDFW, also trying to keep track of what's going on with litigation in the watershed, so that he can keep the team apprised of that, because that's not necessarily our singular focus. And for those of you who know me, I'm pretty naive when it comes to these kinds of issues. So it really helps keep me informed and out of trouble. Here's Tom, here's me, kind of keeping me from stepping into it. But in addition to assisting the executive team for project proponents, Hicks Law also provides water rights guidance to property owners looking to voluntarily implement water conservation efforts. As part of this effort, as Tom mentioned earlier, he's been working with project proponents to implement dual representation agreements, so he can work to understand their existing water rights, understand the conservation measures they're looking to implement, and then quantify the expected increments of conserved water. In addition to that, Tom's also developing safe harbor agreements, or these voluntary agreements that would encourage the adoption of voluntary conservation measures. By getting regulatory agencies to, recognize the value of adoption versus regulation, and by determining the increments of water that specific conservation measures provide, and then by providing a way to track the conservation credits as per the individual landowner's water rights. And so, he's working on this gnarly spreadsheet that kind of looks to sort of document those types of savings. All right, so I want to get into updates on the project planning and design. So I'd like to point out that that VRIF is in actuality a planning project because it was funded from a planning grant, not an implementation grant. So because of that, each of the over 24 sub-projects that are funded through VRIF that the executive team sort of works together on or manages, they have deliverables that are tied to planning, not implementation. So these planning deliverables that we have to keep track of, and that the project proponents have to work towards, includes things like technical review, geotechnical, and then design-based review from the assessments, as well as intermediate and final design plans, PAEPs, CEQA compliance, in-stream flow benefits, all of those things. So among VRIF's many goals, one big goal is to get all of those 24 different VRIF subprojects to a point of shovel readiness so that they can be submitted as implementation projects. Okay, so out of all of these different, projects that are strewn throughout the watershed, some of them are at different stages of the planning. Okay, and in fact, up to this point now, we've actually got a couple of different projects which have gone through enough stages of planning that they are actually sufficiently ready to be submitted for funding consideration. And in fact, there are some components of the Ojai Valley Inn VRIF project, as well as the Thatcher School VRIF project, which have been planned out enough that they've been submitted for funding consideration through implementation grants. And that's, again, a big goal here. Okay, I want to make sure to stress this was always a major point of VRIF, to get these projects funded for implementation. And this is why, when we first had the kickoff for this, a year or so ago, this is why we stress all along that successfully executing VRIF was very, very important to the watershed and a necessary first step towards proposing potentially a VRIF 2 sometime in the future that would provide planning monies for a second cohort of these water resilience and in-stream flow projects. Okay, so please just keep that in mind, that this wasn't supposed to be a one-off. This was supposed to be part of a longer continuum of these projects. All right, so I finished off what I would consider to be an update on the progress, and now I want to switch my attention back to the framework itself. So we're back to the framework, which is, again, a major focus of today's talk and also one of the major deliverables for VRIF. Okay, so this framework that I keep bringing up is actually both a process and a product. And I apologize if you've heard this before, but I consider it to be both a process and a product. It's a process that starts with the partners and the framers. And the framers are those who are working closely with the executive team on a sort of a smaller scale, more intimate group to sort of help us flesh ideas out before we bring it out to everybody, so it doesn't seem too half-baked. But it's a process that starts with the partners and the framers, and it moves iteratively, through these prioritization steps and assessment feedback loops that you see here, ultimately to arrive back at a product, which is the framework. And the framework through this process will end up articulating recommendations for a suite of voluntary actions. So to get to where we're at now, we as the executive team, along with the framers, have developed the framework watershed action toolkit which would be here, which would be again a sort of a catalog of different tools that we could use. We've reached the point now where it's sufficient enough to be shared. It's not too half-baked. And now that we've reached that milestone, we're here to seek assistance from the council in transforming these actions that are in this toolkit into framework recommendations. So in grant speak, as I've highlighted here, and as stated directly in the project description, we now need to take the next steps needed to coalesce and synthesize opportunities, which will ultimately move us towards the final framework product. So with that, I kind of want to show you, exactly what it is that we're talking about. So this slide shows the draft Watershed Action Toolkit. Okay, so it's too long for me to fit onto one slide, so I kind of took it and split it in two so you can see. So these Watershed Action Toolkit is comprised of a bunch of tools, and these tools are grouped by project type, which you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 project types, and then subgrouped into these tool groups. Okay, so here you see all of the different tools that are part of the time management of water or the water quality improvements, etc. Okay, so these are all put together in this table framework so that we can sort of see more easily what the benefits for each of those individual tools might be. However, in order for the VRIF project team, the executive team, the framers, et cetera, to develop these tools into recommendations, which is a major part of the final framework, we need to further assess these tools, figure out any constraints or data gaps, so that we can maximize their benefits. And to do this, this is why we're here. We'd like to enlist Watershed Council members to participate in subcommittees with the purpose of assessing, developing, and prioritizing some of these tools that are in the Watershed Action Toolkit. So I just want to sort of talk about what we need specifically. So specifically, we've kind of come up with a bunch of different ways to describe these tools. Okay, so we've kind of worked through and gotten to this catalog of different tools. And so we kind of need help making it around to these other parts of this, this feedback loop. So we're seeking assistance with identifying opportunities, constraints, data gaps, and evaluation and prioritizing metrics that are associated with each of these tools. While the executive team and the framers have worked to come up with these watershed action toolkits and the associated toolkit project types, the tool groups, the tool types, the description, etc. We still need to work out these. And so what we'd like for the subcommittees to help with defining are these other aspects of the tools. So for example, the conditions under which that tool may be used, constraints on the tool's use, what are the quantifiable benefits, thresholds, metrics, etc. So this is sort of what we need help with. And I want to point out also that there could be and there has been feedback about how we could expand these conditions or these groupings as well. So even this is still an evolution, but I know all of this is pretty fuzzy. So what I want to do is I'd like to sort of step through an example of the way we've taken this approach with the framers as sort of an example to any potential subcommittee, any members of the council would be interested in serving on the subcommittees. So I'm going to next move to a slide that's going to look specifically at the example tool of removing Arundo from the watershed and the benefits that it might produce. So as I indicated on the previous slide, we've worked to identify the project type, tool group. In this case, we're looking at Arundo removal. So the toolkit project type would be reduced consumptive use, water quality, time management of water, augmentation. The tool group would be invasive species removal. The specific tool type would be Arundo Donax removal and restoration. A description of this tool would be removal and restoration of Arundo Donax because it uses less water than native vegetation and therefore creates net benefit. Conditions under which this tool might be used and might be specific to could be defined as the riparian channel or Arundo Donax stands in the channel. Constraints, for example, could be issues related to permitting. So the difficulty in getting permitting in a timely way or the cost of it. Additional constraint might be long-term management. How do you deal with resprouts? How do you deal with them financially or on a time management basis? And something that isn't discussed too often, but is an issue, is access to stands. There could be colonies which are on private land, which we're not allowed access to, and they could serve as a source for a rhizome regeneration movement downstream. And again, these are all just sort of what have come up through conversation, and there could be more that could be added to this. And in fact, you'll see these italicized headers here based on the feedback from when we've gone through the exercise of discussing these tools. These are the additional comments that were received to be considered as additions to sort of this flashcard of the Arundo removal tool. So those are being considered. They haven't been incorporated quite yet, but keep in mind, again, this is an iterative and a feedback-driven type of process, and so that's why we're hopeful to get more individuals involved. Moving on, again, I just sort of want to run through this as an example of how we've gone about this process and how you might be able to assist. Quantifiable benefits could be in-stream flows. The subcommittees might identify other benefits such as reduced debris because of or habitat diversity, stream bed quality, things of that nature. Associated thresholds are very important. They define, how much water we might be able to save through taking that action. Heavy literature review, also ground truthing through project planning and project implementation to arrive at what those thresholds for this tool might be. How would you evaluate the tool? What are the metrics? Perhaps it could be acreage removed, native reestablishment, groundwater levels if you're interested in GDEs, things of that nature. And then data gaps. Where do we not know enough to be firm about thresholds or to be firm about other benefits? Could be transpiration rates. Could be, do we really know what the native species transpiration rates are relative to Arundo? How does the site of evapotranspiration change when you do removal of Arundo? And then how do you prioritize removal when you have, significant stands of Arundo within a watershed? And then moving on from that, again, these italicized headers are things that have been submitted as potential additions to this flashcard for this tool, and so they're being incorporated as we speak. Okay, so with that, I am coming up on about a few minutes before my time expires. So what I want to do next is I want to move to questions. I know that was a whirlwind of information, and I do apologize for that, but I wanted to make sure to stick to schedule. So I'll open up the floor to questions. I'll formally end my presentation here. if you are interested in learning more about VRIF, or if you have any questions about our efforts, or if you'd like to participate in the Watershed Action Toolkit subcommittees, please feel free to reach out to me or any of the VRIF project team. In fact, we've got many members of the project team on Zoom right now. So if there are any specific questions, we'd be happy to answer that. You can even reach out to Andy, with the council, and he can let us know to reach out to you. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop talking and take any questions.
Hey, thanks, Jamie, for that. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And if there is time, actually, Andy, if there's anything that the VRIF executive team would like to speak up and say.
You know me, I would love to if I can. This is Regina.
Of course, please.
I just want to make sure that in the title we're talking about stream flow enhancement, but there's also water resiliency. But what we're not highlighting is the toolkit, action toolkit that Jamie had displayed has at the top all these different benefits, and kind of stitching together a watershed action toolkit with the rest of our meeting today. Fire resilience is really at the core of a lot of these strategies. And so I want to just make sure to highlight that some of these actions might be able to be prioritized because they have these multiple benefits, whether it be, groundwater recharge for our Sigma basins, or fire resilience and becoming a fire adapted community, as everyone spoke to. So I just want to make sure we're looking at those other benefits as well, and really welcome input and participation so that it's not just a singular tunnel vision focus of stream flow, but really being able to use those community values and benefits towards understanding how to build projects collaboratively together. So
great point, Regina. Yeah, hopefully everyone can see my screen. I'm not sure, but she's absolutely right. There's fire resiliency right up here, extreme heat reduction. These are all benefits that are sort of tied to all these different tools. And so there are many, many benefits. I've sort of focused on the smaller number of them, but there certainly are a lot. And yes, this is all about being able to pull together projects that have multiple benefits using these tools.
and those benefits are being vetted by reviewers. But again, I think that's part of Jamie's invitation, is to come in and join these work groups that we're going to be initializing. So
yeah, we don't want to do this in a vacuum.
Yeah.
That's not the point of VRIF. It never was. So we would be grateful for participation.
And Jamie, this is Tom Hicks. I think it's important that everybody who's here today knows that the role of legal on the VRIF team is not to be representing any of the parties in the litigation. We're not taking any representations on behalf of anybody in the comprehensive adjudication. And at the same time, some of our project partners are involved in the litigation, and we're accordingly coordinating with them and their counsel so that the conserved water that we're talking about that would fit into this framework and be accounted for. Our job is to give landowners credit for doing conservation actions. I just wanted to make sure that there's no ambiguity within the community about my role on the team and what I'm doing in OI.
Yeah, that's why I love this picture here of you just keeping us all out of trouble and making sure we're not. Me particularly, because I lose sight of that sometimes.
Are you giving me permission to call you Grover from now on?
Well, you can call me Grover or Elmo, or
Elmo,
Jamie is
usually
people know I'm pretty naive, like I said. So I'm kind of focused on
Jamie,
other
can I add one more, just because you have this screen up. I just want to add one more piece that, you know, the IRWM and everything that Lynn is and the Watershed Coalition's working on and the Watershed Council, I think one of the reasons to make sure we're updating VRIF to the councils, ideally this becomes more embedded and helps support and doesn't become a redundancy, but more a tool that leverages all the efforts that have already been worked on. So I just want to make sure that's clear, and that's one of the reasons we definitely want to integrate into the council and the Watershed Coalition. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, this is integrated regional water management. You know, IRWM is the entire process of taking all of these different projects and looking at them and trying to pull them together so they achieve multi-benefits and serve local and regional and state needs. You know, and this is just part of that. IRWM is a wonderful process and you know, has a well-organized structure. In fact, the Watershed Council is a product of the IRWM process. You know, so you know, this in my view, I share that perspective. This is really all about working with IRWM and part of that process, not, you know, not a separate thing. It's all tied together. You know, and through the process of going through all these tools and through the process of reviewing these projects, you know, through VRIF and such, it opens up the opportunity for those could also go in through IRWM. So it's all tied together.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for taking the time here. We have our last few minutes here for general comments about today's presentation or anything else anyone wants to bring up. Please feel free to unmute and speak up now.
Hey, Andy, this is Lynn.
Hey, Lynn.
Thank you, Regina and Jamie, for your comments on IRWM and how this connects. And I was thinking about the value of this whole discussion today and the whole day, really, including all the wildfire information, and wanting to bring that back to the full Watershed Coalition, because we're taking a little bit more of a break from regular meetings where you guys are very actively meeting and doing a lot of great work and some amazing presentations. So I'm thinking about putting together a meeting early next year where we might bring back some of these topics to the full group. And it might be of interest for the full group to hear maybe a shortened or more simplified version of what Jamie just presented, or perhaps quick presentations from Regina, Tom, and Jamie on the different aspects of the program and how some of the learning from that could be applied to other watersheds in the county. So I think that's something I would like to see leveraged up to the rest of the county. And the wildfire information that was on tap today was fantastic. And, you know, obviously the Thomas Fire affected other parts of the county besides just the Ventura River watershed. So I'd love to see, I'd hate to make all the speakers that spoke today come back and do another presentation. And one option would be just to share the video from today's, or the recording from today's session. But maybe we can have a conversation about that, and then tying back some of the IRWM program elements and the planning effort coming up with new projects being added, so that we have full engagement of all the watershed committees in that larger picture. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, that's a great idea. I know this presentation will be uploaded at least the week after, so it'll be uploaded on YouTube and through the Watershed Council webpage, venturawatershed.org, where you can find past meeting minutes, videos, PowerPoints, and all that good stuff. But the presenters today were very amicable to wanting to present, so I wouldn't see why they wouldn't feel happy to present in other watersheds that are about Ventura River. All right, thank you. Any other kind of questions, comments, concerns? All right, well, I just want to say thank you once again to all the speakers. I appreciate the time and the effort. And I hope everyone enjoys the weekend. And like I said, everything will be updated about a week after this meeting. So please check back at our venturawatershed.org webpage, or feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you with any of today's speakers. All right, everyone. Well, enjoy the weekend. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Everybody.